Here is my sample presentation for the culture project for third graders. My culture, where my family is originally from, is Ireland. So I'm Irish. And in Ireland, the traditional dress looks like this. People wore kilts, men and women, and they had special stockings called kilt hose, and they wore brogues, which are a type of leather shoe, and garter flashes help hold your stockings up. People would often have kilt pins to hold their kilt closed because it wasn't a sort of skirt like we have now. It was open and you wrapped it around yourself. So this is what traditional Irish men would wear, and I would expect my students to show the traditional clothing of where they are from. So here are some traditional Irish foods. A traditional Irish breakfast includes beans and toast and various kinds of sausage and eggs, and also fried tomatoes and mushrooms. Also, people in Ireland commonly eat fish and chips, or Irish stew, which is made with lamb. Boxty is a sort of a potato pancake, and scones are sort of almost like a muffin, very dense. I would expect that my students would talk about the types of foods traditional to their cultures, and even to tell the class what they eat now at home, if they eat any of the traditional foods. We do in my family eat fish and chips and Irish stew pretty often, and we love brown bread. We do not care for stones, and I don't make box tea because it takes too long. One thing about Irish people is that they are wonderful storytellers, and most commonly in Irish folklore is the leprechaun, which is a devilish little creature who gets into a lot of trouble. So I would expect my students to talk about maybe art or a common characteristic in their culture. For Irish people, like I say, storytelling and fairy tales is very common, but for your culture it is probably something else. So my students would not just talk about their culture, but a culture common in their community. And in every one of my classes, we have always had a lot of Hispanic children. So it might be that some of my students would study the Mexican culture. This is common clothing in Mexico that men and women would wear. It is very colorful with a lot of embroidery. So they could also show foods and other things in the Mexican culture that is common. Here are common Mexican foods. In Mexican culture, it is very common to make salsa or homemade guacamole, and this person is making homemade guacamole, and they are using a stone bowl and grinder called a mortar and pestle, and it is very common to make foods like guacamole and salsa with a mortar and pestle, and you can also grind spices, and these are very heavy tools to use. And I would bring my mortar and pestle into class so that the children could look at it and maybe try it out. So this is very common for Mexican culture. In Mexico, mariachi bands are very popular, and in restaurants, they almost always have a mariachi band, and the music is very lively and beautiful, but it can also be very sad. Mexicans are very creative people, and their songs are full of poetry. So we would probably listen to some music from a mariachi band, and I would interpret it for them so that everyone would know what the songs were saying, and we could talk about what it is like. And then the students also that are studying the different cultures, I would expect them to talk about the different music or arts from the culture they were studying. The last part of the project is to make comparisons. So this is the Irish flag, and this is the Mexican flag. So the things that Ireland and Mexico have in common is that they are both storytellers, right? Because Ireland tells a lot of fairy tales, Irish people do, and they talk about leprechauns, and their stories are about being lucky and finding gold and treasure. And people from Mexico are also storytellers, but generally their stories are told more through songs or paintings. And so I would talk about how that is common. And I would expect my students to talk about some things that the culture they studied and the culture they're from have in common, and some ways that they are different. Mexican food and Irish food is very different. Mexican food is full of flavors and it's very spicy, and there are a lot of vegetables that are used, where Irish food is more hearty and mellow flavors, not spicy, and generally not as many vegetables. So that is all.